morning, everyone. Can you hear me? No? Is this on? Just closer? I'm usually... Hello? That's the problem. I'm so loud I don't use these. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Westminster. My name is Melissa Ballback, and Sarah Williams, my co-chair of Odes to Joy, and I welcome you to our beautiful sanctuary. We are here today to learn more about the cultural, artistic, and religious treasures that surround us here. These windows, and others that we won't see today, which give us so much color in our lives, especially on a dull, dreary, gray Buffalo March day. These windows were installed roughly between 1930 and 1960. As we will hear today, the time, the supply chain challenges of World War II, and weather have taken their toll on these treasures. Today, we will learn more about the physical condition of these windows and the steps that will be needed to restore them. As you can see from the scaffolding and the plastic around you, and listening to Garrett playing on our two brand new organ consoles, Westminster is actively in the process of preserving and protecting our treasures that have been gifted to us. Thus far, through our Preserve the Pinnacle and Odes to Joy capital campaigns, we have raised $5.1 million for the repair of our buildings. We still have roughly $500,000 to raise, much of which will go towards the restoration of these windows. Today, we are thrilled to welcome two very important people in the process of this restoration. McElfresh is the Executive Director of the Stained Glass Association of America. They are conveniently located right down the street from us, and she is a tremendous resource in helping us to better understand the treasures that we have. Ariana Makau is the founder of Nzilani Glass Conservation. She is the second person in the world and the first woman to receive a master's in stained glass conservation from the Royal College of Arts in London. Westminster has engaged her firm to do the assessment of our windows and to manage the entire request for proposal, RFP, process as we seek bids for the repair of these windows. She will also help oversee the entire removal, repair, and reinstallation process. No small task. Please join me today in welcoming these two special guests.
Good afternoon. I am Megan McElfresh, and I'm just here to kick off the party. I'm not the real show, so I'll try to move quickly. I did leave myself a note to speak slower and breathe, neither of which I will do. So my apologies if I talk too fast. I am the Executive Director of the Stained Glass Association of America, one of our nation's oldest professional trade associations. Yes, very proudly headquartered right here in Buffalo, New York. Our offices are in Trinity Episcopal, just down the street. I was feeling very lazy this morning and I drove. I'm always delighted when I get to share close to home because I'm usually not in Buffalo. So I'm really grateful to be with you this morning, and I am just really, really grateful to be here with Ariana. It's our first ever time getting to present together in spite of working together, so this is a very exciting morning for us. I'm a third-generation glass artisan who really wanted to get a job in technical writing and economics. So this job is perfect for me, but I am not an art historian. I am confident that John McClive is here with us in spirit this morning. I spent many hours joyfully sitting with him in your beautiful sanctuary, learning about these windows. So this is a great morning that really gets to bring it all home for me. But I could talk for hours about the industry of stained glass and the science of glass, but we don't have time for that this morning. We need to get to Ariana. We need to just hit the bullet points this morning. So where to start? What is the Stained Glass Association of America, and what are we doing in Buffalo, New York? Let's start there. I think that's the easiest place. The history and appreciation of stained glass is inseparable from its setting within architecture, from the master tradespeople who create and install it, and from the very nature of the material itself, but most crucially, in today, from its place within our communities. First and foremost, let's remember how young America is as a country. And let's remember what it took to even get to the point where we could build these incredible structures. Today, we're really just reaching the first speed bumps in the life cycles of these windows. These are the first known American-made figural windows. They're from 1843, and it's Nativity for Christ Church in Pelham, New York, designed by the Bolton brothers. So 1843 is when America gets its first stained glass windows. That's really not that long ago. As construction exploded across America, Munich-style stained glass was all the rage. Influenced by a Royal Bavarian stained glass establishment, these were fully painted window compositions, and Buffalo got its fair share of them. These are, sorry, these are hard to see. These are down at St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Cathedral, just down the street here. These are Anderley windows, so they were built by a local company. These windows were the most commonly asked for windows as Buffalo was getting built. People wanted things that reminded them of homes. This is what most American studios were being asked to make. And as the building, as these great buildings were being built across the Rust Belt in places like Buffalo, Scottish, English, and German houses were set up in New York City to bring these windows over from Europe. We didn't have enough craftspeople yet to build them in America. Not only that, but we were paying our American craftspeople 3 times what they were paying them in Europe. So it was cheaper to bring your windows over from Europe. So the American stained glass industry is trying to take off, and we're having some trouble competing, something we might be still a little bit familiar with today. So a few dozen firms got together and decided that they would organize and approach Congress to put tariffs on stained glass work. So this effort started in 1893, and it started with about 20 studios, and over the next 10 years, they would organize into a total of 45 studios working together to make industry conditions better in America. And they became known as the Stained Glass Association of America. They were successful in passing tariffs in 1903, and that year formally organized as the National Ornamental Manufacturers Art Glass Guild, to be shortened into the Stained Glass Association of America. So, this year, we're celebrating our 120th anniversary right here in Buffalo, New York, with a growing staff, growing programming, but still facing many of the same problems that we were formed to deal with 120 years ago. It just looks a little bit different because instead of installing new windows, we are now faced with preserving windows that are reaching that stage in their life cycle. Today, the association remains the only 501c6 organization for architectural art glass in North America. We're tasked with the continuing education of our members and the emerging artists that will become the next generation of master craftspeople. We uphold the standards and guidelines for the industry, and we are the only accrediting body for stained glass in the nation. And we will be celebrating later this year here in Buffalo with a 5-day conference that will include a mosaic marathon. We will build a mosaic marathon style and donate and install it to a local nonprofit, leaving a work of art behind us. We have 27 workshops that will be held over 3 days, 5 tours, 2 days of general sessions, a scholarship auction, and art salon, two juried exhibitions, and then I think afterwards we all take a community nap. I do, maybe. But it's a really great experience, and I encourage you to follow us online because it's a great opportunity to continue to connect with people like Ariana, who will all come to Buffalo. They will come to us, and we can learn more from them. One of the first things we realized we needed to do in the early 1900s was communicate all of this. We had the same problem then that we had now, which is that stained glass is this largely unknown, mystical thing. How do these windows come to be in our buildings? If you don't work in the industry, you don't know. So we needed to communicate not just with ourselves, but with the public, and let them know about how we did what we did so that it wasn't a mystical process. Because anything that is mystical can be easily misled for a customer, for a steward, for a caretaker. If you don't know what you don't know, how do you know how to do the right thing? Stained glass has not magically become more affordable in the last 120 years. So the same issues of trying to make sure you are making the right decision and ordering the right windows for your community, now you have the same task, but it's restoration and care and maintenance based. No one has enough money to make this decision twice, right? So we are the proud producers of the Stained Glass Quarterly, one of America's longest continuously published art journals. And it is now edited and produced just down the street from you in Trinity, Buffalo. Subscribing to the Quarterly is one of the biggest ways you can support the work that we do all over the nation. And I'm worried I did not bring enough copies with me this morning for you to all take one home with you. So if you don't get a copy this morning on your way out, please come visit me at Trinity, Buffalo, and I will give you a copy there, and you can test it out. So from the caretaker's perspective, these beautiful windows that you've created, I pulled your creation window, which I believe is in this back corner here. Yep. You've created these beautiful windows, and now you get the joy of caring for them. Now you get to demystify this process yourselves and go through everything we've just spoken about. And that is what Ariana does for people all across the nation. That's what accredited studios like Ariana do all across the nation. This is where the process starts in our office. We get emails every single day from people who are convinced still that glass is this medieval object that is completely difficult to understand, and the Stained Glass Association is working every single day to just put more information out into the world to make it easier to understand. My favorite email that I still get at least once a month starts with a conversation about whether or not stained glass can even be repaired, because isn't it flowing in response to gravity, and won't they just have to order new glass windows once they fall out? I want to assure you that your wine is fine. Your wine bottles are fine. The glass is not going anywhere. Glass is not a supercooled liquid, and that is not the problem. But that's how much information still needs to be spread. So one of the graphics that I came up with as I walked into the Trinity Sanctuary, and this is a famous window in the Trinity Sanctuary, I've never seen a window hanging upside down to correct the gravity problem, but I think it would be a really cool public art idea. So one day when we all have some spare change and we want to just approach education in a new way, I think this would be a great way to do it. Instead, what we've done is we've taken all of the publications from the last 120 years that are in huge cabinets in my office, and we've started digitizing them, and every time we digitize another piece of paper, we put it on our website. Stainedglass.org is now a constantly growing online resource center of information. How to care and maintain for your windows, what are the basics of cleaning, what does it mean to hire a studio? How do I even find a studio? So many communities out there approach us and say, well, we got a quote, but like stained glass is dead, right? Like, is this the only quote we can get? No, it is not. Like, let's find out more about your windows before you make this decision. More information is never a bad thing. You are in control of your story about your windows. You are the best advocates for your windows in writing your story. You guys already have such a head start in terms of comparison with so many of the communities that I work with. You've had a wonderful historian that has worked so hard to pass on that knowledge to this community, and you have an incredible, the first time I heard about Westminster was through the Weedy program. You do so much work out in the community, and this is the house where you come to restore your souls and your energy when you go out and do that work. And between those two tools, you have an incredible gift in that to put together the story and tell the community why these windows are so important, why they need to be restored, and what it means to Buffalo that this building is a part of our living museum of stained glass in our city. So, you're a poster child, I think, for our industry in what can be done right in taking care of windows and in making sure that that story gets told. So, in the work that we do down the street, I know I reference Westminster quite a bit as I go out into the world and talk about communities that are doing great work. And I've brought quite a few things with me today as well. In the work, like, these are things that this community knows so much better than others. A report was put out by Partners for Sacred Spaces about how, yes, like, these are your four walls, but like, you go out and do things from these four walls in the community that's very important. And there are statistics that exist to help you keep telling this story and keep doing great work here. So I am really excited to be able to turn it over to Ariana, who's going to demystify the process so it doesn't look like this for you guys, so it doesn't feel like this in your minds, just caution tape and things like that. This is the right way. This is not scary. We're gonna help you understand what's going on behind the veil. And so that I don't take up any more time, we're gonna unplug and let Ariana move forward from here.
Like, that's the smoothest transition I've ever had with technology. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you all for being here. Tell me if I am not loud enough. I'm hearing that. Okay, let's just move this up. There we go. I'm a hand talker, so I'll try to stay close to the mic. I am just so happy to be here and see so many faces and so much interest in this talk. This is my preservation perspective on these windows. And I say preservation even though I'm a conservator, because I really think that the future lies in people who are interested in restoring, people who are interested in conserving, and I think both of those things fall under preservation. So you can either be involved by literally putting your hands on preserving windows, but you can also be involved in understanding and appreciating the history, being in the space, and supporting those people who do the work. I wanted to give you a little bit of a background, a little bit deeper than my bio, because a lot of people are still a little confused as to who is this person? Who is Ariana? What is her place in this whole preservation process? So Nzilani Glass Conservation is the name of my studio. It was also the name of my paternal grandmother. And when I received my master's in stained glass conservation from the Royal College of Art, my father took me aside. He's Kenyan, and in his tradition, you're given one name when you're born, so you're not hey you, and you're given another name when you come into your own. You can be 5, you can be 25, you can be 55. It's your parents' prerogative. And so he said, I'm gonna give you the name of my mother. So when I came to establishing my company, I thought, what a great way to honor this person who was so pivotal in my life. And even though she never left Kenya, she seldom even went to Nairobi. She was very rural. She would apparently elbow my grandfather and say, look at all these children, look at all these grandchildren, look at all these great-grandchildren. They all have your last name, but I'm the only one who has a company in America named after me. So Nzilani's been in existence for close to 20 years. Well, we just hit 20 years in January. And our mission has always been, from the beginning, but a few years in, I really realized how to articulate it: be safe, have fun, do excellent work. First and foremost, literally, safety comes first for us. And especially when we're working on large monumental pieces, because the components have lead in them and sometimes asbestos, this is what we wear when we gear up to remove windows. It looks a little space-like, it looks a little scary, but it means that we can keep our lead levels low. It also means that the communities in which we work are also safe throughout the whole process. Have fun. Well, I'm having fun right now. This is one of the things I love to do, is to communicate with people and explain what we do. We also have fun in what we do. I think everyone who comes into work, Megan sort of mentioned earlier that stained glass studios are still struggling to have equitable wages all the time into what we do. We do this because we're passionate about the work that we do. We would also like to be considered skillful. There's not that many people who do it. And when you're working on monumental pieces like this, I have my hard hat. I know how to wear my safety gear. I'm really good. I have a glazing license in California. I'm a certified lead worker. I'm a certified asbestos worker. And hey, on top of that, I'm also an artist. So I think sort of changing the dialogue and having people really understand what we do. And yes, we have fun as artists. And yes, we love coming into work, but also being paid for that that job on par with other people is really important. And doing excellent work. If we are being safe and we're having fun, excellent work kind of follows right after that, right? Because you're not worried about your safety. You get to work with amazing things all the time. And I feel like everyone should feel that way about their job. I certainly do. So what's my role here? My role is to be an advocate for the windows, an interpreter of the windows conditions for people who don't work with them all the time, so that's what I'm doing right now. I created the RFP, the request for proposals, for studios who will be working on the windows and working with members of the church to decide on that, and how to select professionals who can work on the windows. And we're concentrating right now on the windows here in the sanctuary and in the front portion of the church, but there's, as you know, there's lots of different types of windows here, and so lots of different people can work on them. And then I'll continue to provide, as Melissa mentioned, support throughout the whole project. One thing I won't be doing, and Nzilani won't be doing, we're not doing any hands-on work, because I really strongly feel that there would be a conflict of interest if I said, hey, you gotta fix this, and guess who's the only people who can do that? I think that division is really important, so people who are being consulted really feel like they've got an advocate on their side. And I've worked on or bid other jobs where I wasn't the consultant and I felt fine to bid the job. So enough about me. let's talk about these windows. What do you look for when you're looking at assessing windows and assessing their condition? There are 4 key components: the glass itself, the cane, which traditionally is lead cane. Sometimes it's other types of metals, but here it's lead. The paint and stain, and then the putty, which is sort of like the unsung hero of the components. Putty goes underneath the lead, and it's what weatherproofs your windows. And this is a cross-section of what every type of, from the simplest leaded glass window to a stained glass window looks like. And I think this is really important for people to understand what we're looking for when we're assessing windows. So the cross-section is the lead, the little I-beam, and then the glass sits in there. So we don't pour lead around the glass. A skilled glazer has taken every single piece of glass that you see here and married it into a piece of lead cane. I often get the question, well, lead's toxic. Why do you use it? Can we have 3D scanners? Can't we just scan something around the glass? Lead is toxic, but you know what else it is? It's an amazingly malleable material. It's, as an artist, I always do this when I'm talking about it because it's really fun and amazing and structural to go around pieces of glass. And if you deal with it safely, it's fine. So, I think a lot of you have your maps in your hands here. And I'm going to use this arrow here. I'm standing here. And then these are the windows on either side. So one of the first things that a conservator does when they're looking into the history of a church is just sort of getting this overview, literally in this case, of what you're looking at. And one of the things I like to do is know that there's a history behind the windows, but I just look at the windows without getting that history. So I don't want to be biased. I'm just looking at the mechanics of it. And then I go back around and look at the history and try to do this overlay of different information. And then you start to tease out different things. So I know that originally the church's goal had been to have all of these windows filled by Nzilani Studios. But because of the history, they literally missed the window, ended up working with other studios instead. What usually happens when you have placeholder windows and then you replace them, you start at the front of the church and move back as you have funds. But as you can see here, we started over here and went around that way, which is kind of interesting and unique. So the newest newest window is at this corner in the back, or the front, rather, of the church. Whoops, oh my goodness, just getting too excited. So in looking at the different studios, I've color-coded them. This comes from my first grade teacher mother. Here are all the different studios we have who've contributed to the beauty of this building. And when they're color-coded, this you don't have. You have this map. This was inspired by Melissa. Melissa, I don't know where you are right now, out there. She was asking me about how I was looking at things, and so late last night I just threw together another map. So you'll have this later. But the dark color is the earliest time this studio contributed a window, and then the lighter color is later on. So you can see all the different studios, and then over here, I'll go through the conditions, but these are the priority 1 windows that need to be addressed. And you can see here, we have priority 1, 2, and 3. The ones that need the most are here on the south side, which is very typical. And then the ones that, if if the church can't do all of them at once, the northern ones can be done later. And we'll talk a little bit why. So the first thing I look at, because I don't want to be distracted by the beauty of the windows, I really want to focus on the structural integrity, is looking at the exterior of the windows. I should also stress that I came here in August, so a very different type of climate, but it was very informative. What I noticed are not necessarily secondary in importance, but secondary in supporting of the windows, but they do contribute to the overall integrity and condition of the windows. So some of the sills you can see here, there's starting to be separation, there's areas of loss. I was looking at the paint, either paint peeling off, paint loss completely, and how the outside framework was interacting with the protective glazing or storm windows. There's lots of different names for these windows. And then also here, just actual loss of the wooden frame on the exterior and these little leaves, which we'll talk about later too. So then I'm going to give you a few examples of how I started to assess and decide why some windows were higher priority than others. So thinking about it holistically, typically southern windows tend to fail faster, and that's because the sun throughout the whole year is interacting with the windows. So unless you've got a building that's really tight to another building and it has some protection, just the act of the sun passing throughout the year, the UV and the heat, and the windows expanding and contracting with their surrounding structure will make those windows fail faster. And the northern ones are protected a little bit more. The things I was looking at were on both sides, because if you just look at one looks fine, and if you look at the other, you're like, oh, these windows are fine. So the first one I looked at is number 8, and you can look at your little diagram here. So I also like to look at things in both transmitted, so that's light coming through, and reflected light, because that gives you lots of different information. So if you look here, transmitted light, this section looks really nice, and in reflected light, you're like, well, that's kind of weird, there's this paint here. And the lead looks a little bit oxidized on the surface, but it looks pretty flat. I don't see any cracks, maybe something right here, but not too bad. But then you look at the exterior, and this is a diagram. This is actually a page from the RFP for information. And all of the RFPs, all of the windows have their own double pages. So we make these maps, again, to share the information clearly and graphically, what the preservation requirements are of the studio that would be bidding, and then thinking about subcontractor bids as well. If you think back to those photos of the exterior and the sills needing work, the best time to look at how far you have degradation infiltrating into your building is when those panels are out. We kind of have this motto of stained glass is first out, last in. And while the panels are out being worked on, it's a great opportunity for all of the sashes and other things happening in the building to be treated at the same time. So looking at this window, inside looks great, but then you look on the outside and you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of bowing. And also looking at the stability, now we're thinking about 6. So we're back over on the other side. Wow, this one looks great. The stability is pretty good. There were some tree branches touching the exterior, so that's something else we think about, like how is not just the window existing in space, but how does it interact with other parts in the building? So one of my recommendations was if you see any tree branches touching, maybe you cut those back a little bit. And then again, here's that, the framework, the wooden framework on the exterior, not within the frame of the panel. But on the inside, these are conic windows. If you look at it in reflected and transmitted light, that starts to reveal something very, very different. So I was lucky enough, or Nzilani was lucky enough, to work on Charles Connick windows that were fabricated around the same time, the New and Old Testament at Grace Cathedral. And one of the things we noticed was that the windows, we assume, had been installed, and the studio thought they were too bright. And so they put cold paint, or paint that hadn't been fired, on the glass to tone down the windows. Now, over time, that cold paint is peeling up. So you have to think about consolidating the paint on top of that when you're removing those panels, because if you're not conscious of that and you think that all of the glass paint is fine and well adhered, you might lose more of that paint even during the removal process. And you can see here, pretty much the same area. Underneath the paint, there's this strip here that probably was like another line like this, but the intent of the artist or the studio was to cover it up because they thought it was too dark. But then you start to think, well, were there trees out there? And now that there's more trees, the trees are casting more of a shadow, so then what do you do with the paint? Things to think about. One of the other things we look at, again, number 4, so far back. Sorry, I do it by numbers, not by names, but it's nativity. When you're looking really closely, you start to see these amazing things. And if you're wondering about what studio did a window and you're in a church or a chapel or a synagogue, traditionally, the studio signs on the bottom right corner of the windows. And it's great to have archivists like your church has, but if you don't have that, this is a kind of a cool cheat to look. And if there's a whole slew of windows that all look similar, it's either, they may not all be signed. There might be one on the far right or far left. But this was really great. So here's the date. You don't even have to guess. It's 1931. Oh. So again, looking at what we could see there, there were visible cracks, so that's bowing enough that there was separation in the glass. I am sure, I can guarantee you that there are more cracks. You just can't see them while they're here, and I was here for 2 days, so without scaffolding and looking at everything specifically, I wasn't marking every single crack, but that's something that you can look at when you start to do the conservation work. And one of the things that I recommend for any studio that's doing work is to do a lot of documentation. We're really documentation heavy, and it's not just because it's a fun exercise for us. It always informs the conservation, preservation process. And something that I found when we bring people onto Nzilani is they don't really clearly have the full picture of what it is to preserve stained glass windows until you go through that whole cycle. It doesn't even matter where you drop in that cycle. It's almost like a clock. You'll come back around. And it's only until those things line up and you've gone that full circle that you understand the needs of what a whole process needs. So I'll give you a little story as to why it might be kind of important. All of these windows here in the sanctuary have this really intricate steel framing system in which all of the panels sit into. So I guess I should go back. These aren't one huge window. They're comprised of 60, sometimes 70 panels, all slotted together. So within the steel framework, there are steel stops that are custom made to fit around every panel to hold them into the space. You can turn them around if you don't label them. And so one of the reasons why we make these diagrams at the beginning is that on every floor of the scaffolding, you'll have a map. It'll tell you where you are. It'll tell you the number of the panels. And so we label everything on the inside and the outside before anything moves anywhere. And then you also label the stops. The reason I'm so passionate about this is in the past, we were working with a general contractor who said, oh, it's fine, we have a team that's gonna take care of all your steel stops. You just take care of the panels. So we labeled everything. Our team, when they removed the panels, took off the stops, they tied little numbers on them, they put arrows as to which direction the stops had to go, and we handed them off to the other contractor. When we got completed with our part and we were ready to put the panels back in, we went to that contractor and said, okay, where are our stops? And they just handed 165 stops in a bundle to us. No labels. And I said, where are the labels? And they go, oh, well, we took them off because we had to paint the stops. And I said, why didn't you put them back on? Oh, we didn't think you needed them. So that added another 2 days for the team to figure out which way those stops went, because there was a discrepancy of 32nd of an inch, 64th doesn't seem like a lot, but it was a lot. So as much as you can do to front load, even though it seems like it takes a lot of time, think about this and you come back and you're like, all right, this is number 13, orientation top left, put it in. Maybe you even get to use the same hardware because the screw holes fit up. These are things that are so important and are really, they seem like such a little thing, but they really add up. So one of the other things that I look at, of course, is the glass. We've talked a little bit about the framework, we've talked a little bit about the paint, but looking at the glass, some things that people see a lot are cracks in the glass, right? And there are different ways you can repair them. This is a really great example of how someone has repaired a piece of glass, probably in the past, that they took the top layer, if you're thinking again about the I-beam, and the vertical part, someone has cut the top part off, the top flange, and then it's called a strap lead because it just sort of straps on top of the crack. And sometimes it's sandwiched together, sometimes it's just aesthetic and goes over, and the glass underneath is still moving back and forth and can abrade against itself, and you lose more paint. What this image looks like with this line and there's some paint loss is that someone removed a strap lead in a previous repair and then tried to do some in-painting, but wasn't very successful. So when and if this window is treated again, this can be done to a higher level. Look at this. Someone is shining on us. How lovely. Other things that I noticed when I was doing the initial assessment was multiple cracks. So you see here, it's detailed, and it seems fine, but then when you look a lot closer, there's multiple cracks in one piece of glass. Now I'd like to concentrate on the two windows, which we can't really see right now, that faced east. And they're really unusual. This was my fun time. If this was fun, this was even more fun because it was a discovery. So on my right over here, your left if you would, or I guess your right if you would turn around, you have such an amazing music program. So up in the choir, sort of a choir office-y area or storage area, there are these amazing diamond windows that my assumption are some of the earliest windows in the church. And they have this stencil design that's repetitive throughout the field of the glass. And you can see some look really great, and other ones have no paint at all, or there's this very faint hint of what it used to look like, which is referred to as ghosting. And one of the things that we really need to think about as we move forward in the conservation process is what the aesthetic desire is of the church. Do you want to replace those pieces that are ghosted with what it would have looked like on day one? Do you want to match something in the middle? Do you want to match something that looks ghosted, or do you want to consolidate that? because you want to talk about the history of the window and how much paint has been lost. Sometimes you can replicate paint loss but fire it correctly. So all those discussions need to happen at the beginning in order for everyone to be on the same page, both the studio who's doing the preservation work and the church at large, because you don't want to have a window be reinstalled and you're like, I never thought it was going to be that dark, if it was returned to the level to what it looked like at the beginning. The other thing in this window is that this is an original piece and this is a replacement piece. And you can tell, I'm going to try to paint with my arrow here. The original piece has this flourish, right? It has a really nice end to it. Here on the right, it's a little bit more intentional. It's almost like someone was tracing what an original piece looked like, right? So there's less fluidity and completion of the line. But now, it's been there for a while. So now it's integrated into the history of the window. So do we throw out all those replacements? Do we keep them? Do we document that this is what it looked like? Again, these are super fun questions that I love to have, and I love to engage with clients as to, where does history stop, or does it stop? And then on this one, these are repairs that we could edge bond, so remove that lead replacement and return that to one single unit. Keeping these windows in mind, the last pieces of Tiffany windows, which you see here in the foyer, these are beautiful. They're in relatively good shape. And their storm windows are these quarry windows. And then there's the actual clear storm windows on the outside. So the Tiffany windows are actually protected twofold. And they're the only windows in the whole church that are. But if you're thinking about preserving the quarry windows, in order to get to them, you have to do something with the Tiffany windows. And so the expectation of preservation of those two windows is very different. So again, something you need to discuss at the very beginning before you dive into, oh yeah, let's repair those, and then you're working over top the Tiffany windows. Both the quarry windows and this other window on the other side, which is the youngest window, are really unique and, again, fun for me in that they bifurcate these levels within the church. So on the outside, it looks pretty typical, even though this is the protective glazing. But then on the inside, hopefully this makes sense. This is standing on the edge of a floor, which is up top, and looking down. So you can see the window all the way down if you're sort of standing at the precipice of the window. But there's no protection, or you could drop things from one floor to the other. So that's sort of interesting, and I think it was done because there was established outside protection, and so those panels were installed from the inside. So in order to preserve those windows, because they do need preservation work, they're starting to bow. There's a little bit of paint loss. It also affords everyone a great opportunity to do photo documentation, and you can build the window virtually and see the whole window as one unit, because you can do that in Photoshop. And so this guy won't be beheaded anymore, right? Like there's this little half of a head, and I'm sure he's just been looking at the floor since 1967. Like, I would like to see people, right? So these are things in modern preservation that some people think. So it's not, as I was saying, it's not always hands-on. There are things that you can do to preserve and share access to windows that you couldn't do before. So we're getting close to the end, closer to question time. But before that, these are things I like to share from the beginning of time, stained glass windows were storytellers, right? They told the story traditionally of the Bible in churches for people who couldn't read or were too young to read. And so you can follow the stories throughout the church. For me, they also tell the story of the artist. And so what I got really excited about is looking at some of the windows on this side. Again, there's this pomegranate section over here, and if you look right in the corner, there's the signature of Conic. But what else you see is this painted and then a little bit of paint removal, intentional, it's not paint loss. But what this is a thumbprint, right? So someone was painting and then put a thumbprint in there to remove some of the paint. And then you look a little bit closer at this tree, there's another one, right? So it's intentional. And then here's another one where there's a thumbprint and a drag. And for me, that was really exciting to see because the conic windows we worked at Grace Cathedral had the same thing. So these border fillets or sacrificial border pieces, we had to do a lot of replacement in those. And it was actually really interesting to assess how the painters had done it originally. Even though they looked really gestural, it's actually, one would be a thumbprint and a drag, one would be thumb, finger, 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 thumb, all those kinds of things. If there is any opportunity to look at pieces closer, I encourage you to do so. So, what can you do now? I'm trying not to look too mad here. Hopefully this is encouraging. It's like, okay, we're empowered. What are we going to do now? I encourage everyone here to use preservation, to prepare for it. And this is intentional of the two colors, your and also our future, right? So this is a great lecture, but I want you to take something home. These windows are going to need some help. We know that. But I love to engage with people and talk about this. And I really appreciate you listening to me and giving me your time. And don't go away yet. Whoop. I'm going to pass over briefly.
Ariana's going to take questions, and while you're thinking of them, I just want to say a huge, huge, huge thank you to Megan and to Ariana. Like wow. On behalf of the Odes to Joy team, Melissa, Lucinda Hone, Garrett Martin, our director of music, Sari Becker, our development person, we can't thank you enough. We're so fortunate to have you down the street from us, our new best friend. And Ariana, we are so inspired by your knowledge and passion for the stained glass art form. If God is in the details, we are so grateful for every minute of your time. Special thanks to Tom Warzowski, who led us to you as our consultant. This church is a house of worship, home to music, mission, and many ministries. We are also a people primed to love and create beautiful, caring relationships in the world. The repair of one part restores the whole. So thank you to all of you for being here, for caring and supporting and hoping with us. We encourage you to come back often, watch our progress. And now again, Ariana, thank you for guiding and inspiring our human hearts, got that from the hymn this morning, in the restoration of this jewel box, another word I got from you, that is Westminster. Questions?
Yes. Yeah, so just to repeat the question, do I think that any of the windows have had any hands on them since they were originally installed? The answer to that is yes. That one example that I gave with the potential strap lead being removed, I think that some of them have been over time. There's not, or at least I haven't heard of yet. Sometimes there's records from the church, from a church, not just this church, that you'll just get an old invoice that says, repair of windows, X amount of dollars. And you're like, what did you do? Sometimes the windows will tell you to anthropomorphize them a little bit. Once you remove the windows or spend a little bit more time with them. And I also just wanted to touch on this if people have questions, because these are questions I've heard while I've been working with the folks at Westminster. So what are the next steps? So the first step is to issue the RFP, the request for proposals. And then we'll work on them together and receive and review the bids, and then select which windows to preserve and fundraise as needed. And then select the studio or studios to do the work. So a few things on that. Sometimes I get asked, well, how much would it cost to do all of these windows? And since I'm not bidding the job, I don't feel like I can give an answer, because there are lots of different factors that go into that. There can be one-person studio or one or two-person studio. There can be a large studio. And having gone from being a one-person studio to a studio that has employees, and considering health and safety, considering your overhead, as your space gets bigger, obviously you're going to have to pay more for that, considering multiple studios maybe coming from multiple states and all of that. I don't like to be elusive, but I do like to be informative, and so I can't give a number to that. Same thing too, how long is it going to take? I don't know, right? We won't know until the studios reach out as a response to the RFP. One thing though that I didn't touch on, but really resonated with me, and especially with what you just said, is that I really like working with organizations and churches like this that are really inclusive. And for me, as someone who is hopefully at the prime of my career, not at the end of it, I still feel pretty vivacious and climb up scaffolding, but we really do want to bring up the next generation of folks who are really passionate and excited about preservation. So if the same one or two or five handful of studios are getting the work to do everything, then those people are going to get left behind. And so Westminster is really excited and I think open to the fact, and you can see that as even demonstrated with this multiple studios who originally made the windows, multiple studios can work and preserve the windows, and maybe work in concert with different organizations to do some of the work together. And what I found in my own training and bringing up of people at Nzilani is that there is sort of an arc in agility, if you will. So you have glazing, actually building the windows. That acuity takes between, 12, 18 months in general for someone to really feel like they have a handle of it if they've never done it before. But all the steps that come up to that point and all the steps on the other side of that, you can train much quicker. And so working with people who have different experiences and insights and time on the bench is not necessarily the same as experience. I think opening it up, and that will definitely make things go faster. Any other questions? Oh my goodness, okay. Everyone went up at the same time. Okay, I'm just gonna you, sir. So the question was, when were stained glass windows first made, and has the technology changed, correct? Was there anything? Where? Do you want to take part of this? Or I thought, you can't. Yeah, so we can tag team. Megan and I do this all the time.
I mean, the earliest windows that still exist today are from the 12th century. I mean, yeah. But
Yeah.
you have to go to them, you
Right.
know? And like, has technology changed? Not really. I mean, but we do have electricity now, which is kind of nice.
Right.
So now instead of lighting our irons on fire to melt lead, we just plug them into the wall, which is kind of nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also when you're talking about when and where, so the oldest ones are usually in a museum, right? And then the life cycle of active stained glass leaded windows depends, right? If you're south or north and all these other things, or you're in a area where the weather changes a lot. Some windows have been up for 1 or 2 centuries, and some of them don't last more than 50 years. It's you have to incorporate everything together in that the design of the windows, are they built in a way that the design drives the form but not the structure, so they're inherently built to accordion over time, or is someone thinking about the structure? So the base way of building a window has not changed. I think documentation, obviously, people used to do, drawing. It's almost like blueprints, right? We used to do them by hand, and now they're done on a computer. At my studio, I make sure that everyone does everything by hand before they jump onto the computer, because this is really important, and we're not going to get robots to take windows out anytime soon, and we're not going to get robots who can build windows. And thinking about like the aesthetic style, so if you're rebuilding a window, does your lead line go all the way through, or does it stop at a multiple joint because this piece of glass is a little bit more pointy and you got to give it a little cushion and a little love, right? Like a machine's not going to know that. So it's pretty much the same thing. But yes, I do like electricity is nice. I was up at Buffalo working with graduate students, conservation graduate students, earlier this week, and I said, what kind of tools do you have? And they have this ancient soldering iron, which I love. It's just this big, huge thing with no electrical, and I guess you would put it in a furnace or a fire and then try to solder. I mean, I guess all the glazers look like this, or at least their hands did. Yeah. Yes.
Two things. Is there a significant R value that we can claim back in terms of insulation and energy loss in this project, or are we pretty good on our storm stuff? I mean, I know they all have to be replaced, but could we expect an upside in our heat loss? One question. Second question is, what would the longevity? You just mentioned something, but in this work, in this decade or this century, what is the expected length of the lifespan of these windows, the investment we're making?
Right, it's a really good question. I know. Let me introduce you to Megan. If you're local, to talk to Megan about that. There's not a simple answer. Again, this is not me trying to be like, pay no attention to the woman behind the curtain. But there's so many components to that question. But the one thing that I can answer is ensuring that there is a studio or studios that know how to build correctly. They're not sacrificing their jumps between the joins with like extra solder blobs or lead. All of that will lead to not lasting as long as the windows can. And hopefully that's going to be part of my participation, is collaborating and informing, if not just confirming that the studios that are doing the work are doing it correctly. There was something over here.
And in tying to the previous question about technology, one of the biggest changes in our industry in that term is in networking with other organizations and with the technology that they're using. It's not, and again, it's not to get out of answering the question, but it's not really fair to just point at the windows and say, how do we get these windows to solve all the energy problems of our building, right? Like, it's about the whole health of the building. Windows have never been energy efficient, and they will never be energy efficient, right? There is some really exciting technology. One of the things that we do at our conferences, last year we went to Toledo, where Pilkington Glass Company, who probably made the windshield in your car, is developing a glass that looks like a regular window glass, but collects solar energy to offset peak energy output to help with that problem, but it's not going to magically make the building more efficient. It's still a sheet of glass. One of the biggest issues with the windows and how they're doing right now is the sills. How is the roof? How is the rest of the building? How is the masonry? Like, the windows aren't leaking in my house, but the bricks are falling off the side. So, like, it's about the whole health of the building and not just the windows, and that's part of why that question is so hard to answer and why it always feels like we're trying to shirk the answer. And even the association does not have a one-size-fits-all answer to that. We have a multi-page PDF to get you started with the conversation. In a lot of cases, and for a lot of people, what we found is that environmental protective glazing, the cost of that is actually hurting the longevity of the building. And if you put aside every 20 years what you spend on that glazing, then every 100 years you'd have the money to fix the windows. So you haven't actually gained anything, and if it's put on improperly, it's damaging the windows. So there is no good answer to that question. It has to be a conversation between an expert that knows what they're doing and the community and their needs and how is the building. It's a big conversation.
Okay, there was a question floating around here. Okay, so the question was, define a glazer. The way I use it is someone who is building the windows, right? So there's, an apprentice glazer, junior glazer, master glazer is someone who doesn't need any training to build a window. That is in my studio. So I think there's different terminologies in different studios. I think what also is challenging is, I said at the beginning that I have a degree in stained glass conservation, but I also have a glazer's license. So in California, that means I can put in a rectangular window into a architectural space. And I think sometimes people conflate the two, right? So a glazer, your stained glass windows are failing, and so you call up a glazer, go through, type in glazer and then your locality, and that person doesn't really understand how leaded windows work. And so it's really important to make sure that you marry the ability of the person who's working on the windows with the complexity of the stained or leaded glass window. I feel like there was a question back there. Okay. I'm sorry, I hate saying just you, but I don't know who everyone is. Okay, so the question was, do I communicate and share information with other experts, particularly in Notre Dame? Yes, so there's not that many of us. Even internationally, there's not that many of us. And in fact, I think within 2 hours of the fire happening in Notre Dame, the word happened in our studio, and there was this sort of moment of silence. I also I'm very extremely lucky that my studio head, who's also a very old and dear friend, Armel LaRue, is from Brittany. And so I was like, we got to get on the phone now. So she reached out en français to all of her friends out there in her communications. I reached out to all my communication, or all my people who I knew from my time of working in London, and said, if you need people, we're available. And they're like, we got this. And they have enough studios there. But I guess that's a very long-winded answer for yes. And I think it's really, really important to be open about information and not be proprietary about it, because one of the things, again, that we do with documentation in our own work, and I encourage other people to do it, is document all the different steps that you do when you're working on a window. And that includes mistakes or a technique that you started to go down a road and you're like, this didn't work. So the next time, I always say I would love to come back to any location where we work on windows to say hello, to gather with the new friends I've made. I don't want to come back to do a repair. So the next group of people who come back probably will not know me. It won't be my kids either. They're not interested in this. That document becomes a blueprint for the next people, right? So they can just read through it and say, oh, I have this feeling that I'm going to do things this way. Oh, wait, these people did this way before and it didn't work. Or they did it this way and it worked, and so we know just to replicate that. Another anecdote from when we were working at Grace Cathedral, the first thing we did was do a survey. So we, counted all the panels and numbered all of them, and sort of divided things up between lancets and the rows, and documented it from the inside. And then it was such a love letter to all of us when we actually took the windows out, and we had seen underneath the lead flange, etched into the paint, was the ordering system that the Conic Studios did, and it matched ours. It was so, and they could have gone this way, right? So it was just, I'm getting goosebumps right now, right? It was really, really cool. So documenting is really important, and yeah, sharing of information is important as well. There's enough windows for everybody. I don't think we need to hold on to them so tightly. Yes, although there was a question over here first. And then I'll come back to you. Yes?
I hear often the term used, well, we've got Tiffany windows, and then I hear somebody saying, when I look in the brochure, it says Tiffany Studios. What is the difference?
What is the difference between Tiffany Windows and Tiffany Studios windows?
They were actually designed by Tiffany, and the latter just by some artist out of its studio.
Right. Got it. Thank you. So the question was, there's Tiffany windows and Tiffany lamps, and there's Tiffany style windows and Tiffany style lamps. So I think it's sort of like Kleenex and tissues. All tissues are Kleenex, but not all. Well, sorry, all Kleenex are tissues, but not all tissues are Kleenex, right? And so Tiffany really highlighted and brought to the fore layering of glass, copper foil technique, but also Tiffany, the person, and Tiffany Studios, the studio, were really good at marketing and PR, right? And so it became a Tiffany style. And because of that, their name is somewhere. It might be tiny and hidden, but it's somewhere. Even in the lamps, it's in the rim on the bottom. There'll be a stamped tab that goes within it. And so often people will say, oh, I have this Tiffany lamp. can I bring it to your studio? And we'll say, sure. And they'll bring it, and I say, I get to be the bearer of bad news and say, well, it's the style of, but not an actual Tiffany window. Is that what you're asking? I want to.
No, it's just that people places of worship and so on, say, oh, we've got Tiffany windows, and I go and see them. Actually, they came from the studio, and they were from his manufacturing, but they were designed by somebody completely different.
Mm.
And Tiffany himself had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Right.
And
There.
I'm not talking about fake news and so on, but sometimes I would like to learn what the difference is between the stuff produced by the studio and stuff that he personally did, like McElfresh and others.
Yeah, I mean, there were also some pretty notable documented instances of copycats that were sort of trying to, garner the same prices and everything else, and trying to copy his signature at some point. So that could be a very interesting afternoon spent sort of diving into that, which we could also do on a bus just going around Buffalo. I think we have a whole library of that here, which is great. But yeah, I would love to get into that,
Yeah.
but it would take
Another, yeah.
hours.
There was a question. Yes. Uh-oh. Great. Yes. So the question is someone painting on the glass? Is it fired? Is it not? And I'm going to add to this. You didn't ask the question, but I think it goes together. And apologies that I didn't start with that part. It's because I do it all the time. So all the color, the base color in the glass here is inherent in the glass. So it's not painted. And they start off with pieces of multicolored glass. Then it's painted, usually on the front interior side, with ferrous oxide paint. So that's for the line work. And then for the shading, and I always like to equate the painting part of it, the shading, to if anyone's ever drawn on black pieces of glass with white crayon or white pens. So you're pulling out the highlights, right? So you'll cover the whole piece of glass with paint, and then you take the paint away to bring out the highlights instead of adding the darkness on. Then maybe that glass is fired in the kiln. Stained glass is glass that has literally been stained with silver nitrate. And the stain goes from lemon yellow to sort of a burnt umber color. Traditionally, that's on the exterior. If it's overfired a little bit, it becomes iridescent. So sometimes that's a good way to identify it. And then you could also put enamel on the glass, which is also fired on top of it. Both the paint and the enamel are mechanically adhered through heat onto the glass, and the stain literally stains the first top layer molecularly of the glass. So if we're thinking back to those ghosted pieces, sometimes you'll see something that only has the stain left because the paint has been removed or has come off over time. And things that I have seen, and it's a good way to infer what paint was there before, is paint loss being about 7 feet down because people have been cleaning the windows, right? And that's how far people can reach. And over time, paint gets lost, and then it just looks like a muddled mess, and then you clean it more, and you're pulling more of the paint off. So sometimes you'll have an immaculate window up past that 7-8 foot reach, and down below there's a lot of loss. Luckily, you don't have that here. But yeah, it's fired on. And so that's how I could tell that on some of these windows, it was cold paint. First of all, because it was peeling off sort of in a different, it seems like a more modern type of paint, sort of acrylic peeling off. But the benefit of looking at something with both transmitted and raking light and reflected light is as soon as you put a flashlight on that, you see that an area of paint covers the glass, and it also covers the hardware, right? So that couldn't have been fired because it happened after the hardware, after the panel had been installed. So those are the really fun detective things that we get to do sometimes. Yep. Yes?
What about the availability of the contractors we will need? Are any of them backed up? And I get a question about the timeline. How long is all this going to take? Recognizing that funding has to be in place and RFPs, et cetera. What kind of a bracket do you have, just in very general terms, for a project like this? Let's say we have 3 or 4 windows to start with. Are the studios backed up? Are they readily available? That I'd like your thoughts.
Right. So the question is, what's the time frame? Somewhat like, are studios available to do the work? Are they backed up? What's the supply chain like? I can't speak specifically for any other studio because I don't know what their schedule is. But if it's a vibrant, healthy studio, they're no offense, they're not waiting for you to call, right? In that, like, they don't have anything on their benches now. But depending on what the workflow is and what the weather is like, because it's also dependent on working within a healthy weather environment, there are multiple studios that are available. I think you need to figure out which windows you want to do, who has the acumen to do those windows, and when they're available. But I can't imagine a studio saying, yeah, we'd love to do this work, we'll talk to you in 5 years. Like, you know, and also these windows they're pretty amazing and pretty extraordinary, so they'll make time for you, for sure. But I can't say, oh, this month everyone just like waits for the amazing studios to call them, right? So, Anyone else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Again, it's the Kleenex analogy, right? Yeah, historically, the glass was stained and painted and enameled, and I think it just sort of it's stuck. I am waging my Sisyphean task of having people being able to document those or articulate the difference between the two. But the main thing is just making sure everyone's in the room and being really passionate about it. But if you're talking technically, there are those differences between, leaded glass. Art glass is also good. You can use that, and that's a great umbrella. And then underneath the art glass, then you can go into the detail. So you could say it's art glass with brass came, or art glass with copper, zinc. Frank Lloyd Wright was really into that. Anyone else? Yes. Great question. So the question is, within the RFP, is there or are there considerations for smaller minority businesses or just smaller firms in general to be included in the work here? So first of all, the RFP is written how I would like to bid a job, and having that consideration. And specifically within, there's a section that talks about every single step throughout the whole process. And there are these prompts. Check in with the consultant to see if you need help, or is this okay? It's not the consultant has to go and, I don't like people standing watching me do my work. I know how to do my work, and I can ask questions when I need to, and I'm good to go when I don't have questions to ask. One of the considerations within the review process, though, is what are the ties to this community? Do you do public outreach, and what is your passion towards these windows or stained glass in general? And so hopefully that's a way to tease out and encourage people who maybe don't have decades and decades of experience to bid the job. And I encourage anyone who's like really interested in this, if they feel they don't reach or match the criteria, there will be a process to reach out and ask questions, and then that gets shared with everybody who's bidding the job to make it as fair and equitable as possible. Yes?
I'm curious about the process. When we've decided who's going to do the work, is the entire window removed and something put up in its place, or is it protected and parts are taken out and put back in?
Sure. So the question is, what is the process in window removal? So if you remember from, let me see if I can escape here. Remember from way up in the beginning. This, can you see I'm like right in your, this? When I first started off, I would often recommend just taking out the worst panels and then doing it systematically. But what I've discovered is that the cost to put up scaffolding and take scaffolding down is really expensive. The cost to put up scaffolding and rent it to stay up for a couple months is a lot less. The other thing is the time it takes to mobilize your team and get all your tools and everything set up, and also wrap the scaffolding so that area is contained to keep in all the lead dust when you're removing the panels. That's a lot of setup and takedown time as well. So even if there are some panels that need more work, it makes sense, and it's the most cost effective to do a window at a time. And so all of the panels come out, and then you put something in their place. And then for the duration of the time that the windows are worked on, either that space is darker, or some people replicate what the windows look like. That's not the cheapest process. You also have these lovely clear windows on the outside that you potentially could just have clear protective secondary windows if they're completely sealed around the outside. And so you wouldn't have to put something in their place. But again, that's something to be assessed once you move down the road. Mm-hmm. I would recommend doing a whole window at a time, because it's a nice reset button. And also, if you're taking out one panel, you might have to, if you're thinking about the stops again, sometimes stops are shared between panels, so you take off one and so you're releasing another one kind of, and then to put the stop back in, it doesn't make sense. Again, thinking about the access, putting up one elevation of scaffolding for one window versus putting up one that covers two or three, you get the economy of scale. And so that might be beneficial. So yes, based on the map, like starting on this side where there are more reds makes more sense. But again, you need to look at what those bids are and what encompasses your scope of work. Yes? So the question is, when people take windows out, are they worked on like on the site, or are they worked on in the studio? And the answer to that, some people are mobile, but for panels of this scale, and also thinking again, I'm sorry, this is my little soapbox, but health and safety, until you have something that's completely dismantled, and also the amount that you have here, that makes sense to do it in a contained space in a studio. And if they also have to be rebuilt, then having all the tools and the skills in that place makes the most sense. Some of the techniques like edge bonding, so that would be adhering the glass back together. That takes time. There's passive time in that, so you wouldn't want to pay someone to like edge bond a piece of glass and then just sit there waiting for it. So it makes more sense to do things multiple times, multiple actions. Apologies, at the same time, rather than working on it in place. It could, but
Right.
keep,
I mean,
yeah.
there's parts of the process that have to be level and have to sit for like several weeks. And so it makes sense to get the work back to a studio, which could be, 15 minutes down the road. It could be 8 states away. Once the windows are safely out, moving them 3 miles or 3,000 miles isn't much of a difference. They're safely packed. We're going to pack the windows to move them 3 inches the same way we would move them 300 feet, because we don't want anything else to happen to them. But back in the studio, we have all of the proper equipment to safely mitigate, the lead, keep everyone safe, but also those periods of time when glass is just sitting, you're able to work on other things. So while there are mobile studios, the limitations of that, really wouldn't speak to a job this scale. And then it's also an opportunity, again, going back to the health of the whole building, whether it's plaster and painting work on the inside, or whether it's carpentry or sill work, whether it's masonry, that is an opportunity to very financially efficiently work on whatever else needs to happen to that frame. So that's often why, first out, last in. The window comes out, it gets packed in custom crates, and it goes to where it's going. And for that period of time while the window's being worked on is when you coordinate with the other parts of the team to work on the rest of the building in that area. And then when it all comes back together, you've made a healthy decision for the whole project that's kind of saving any available resources, is how we tend to explain it.
Yeah, I was going to say to save all of us and all of you. Yeah, 2 more questions. Looks like now we have no more questions. Yeah. Thank you.